Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Packer, and I want to welcome you to Basic Soldering. So this is a pre-class module. In other words, this doesn't really count towards the rest of the class, but there's some things that I wanted to talk to you about before we actually get started. So think of this as not module one, but like pre-module one or pre-class. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about were the types of soldering. So the reason I want you to know this is because there are different kinds of soldering. And if you are looking to work with precious metals like sterling silver or gold, this is not the class for you. This is a soft soldering class where we use solder that is lead free, but it's tin. And we work with non-precious metals like brass, copper, steel, and nickel. We do not work with precious metals with this kind of soldering. In fact, hard soldering is what we call soldering with precious metal, and those require actually a torch rather than an iron. So hopefully you're in the right place. If you're not, send me an email and we'll get it figured out for you. Here's some examples of things that I've made with soft soldering, just some very basic pieces that I wanted you to see so that you can get a feel for what we're looking to do and where we're going to go by the end of this class. Here's a few more pieces. You can see these are more home decor pieces. The pieces on the left is a crown, and the piece on the right is a soldered frame set that I made for Christmas. Okay, so the most important thing, I know it says module one, but we're going to pretend it's not module one. This is safety and setup, and mostly safety. We're going to go through safety first, and then we'll go through setup in a second video. So the most important thing to remember when you are soldering is that you are using equipment and chemicals that can be dangerous to your health. Now, you're not going to die immediately because of inhalation from the smoke of soldering. However, over time, it can do damage to your lungs. And if you're already somebody who struggles with asthma, you may in fact struggle a bit if you don't have some good ventilation. So here are my suggestions. Either a mask, doesn't have to be anything specific. It could just be your COVID mask if you want, but something that is filtering the air that's coming through. A ventilator, which is a kind of mask that actually has a ventilation system built in, or the picture that you see here is a fume extractor. It looks like a little fan. What it does is when you turn it on, it sucks the smoke away from you, filters it, and throws the air back out clean, which is really helpful. The other thing that you can do is, because sometimes these things aren't possible, you can sit by an open window and put a fan facing out. And that sort of acts like a fume extractor too. So if you can get close enough to the fan, it'll hopefully suck out all of the smoke and everything, and it won't ventilate it like a fume extractor. It won't filter it, but it'll be going out into the atmosphere, and that's fine. The other things that you might want to think about, if you are somebody who wears glasses, make sure you're wearing your glasses. Even if they're just readers, it's a good idea to have them. If you're not, you might want to get yourself some safety goggles. The reason for this is because when you're soldering, sometimes the flux that we use, which is what makes solder flow, spatters up onto your face. And you won't notice it necessarily until it gets in your eye, and then it's very, very painful. Better to circumvent that by just wearing some goggles or some glasses. To protect your skin, you want to use a lipped tray. And by that, I mean a cookie sheet or something of that nature. More than once, I've had a molten ball of solder roll into my lap onto bare skin. And let me tell you that 750 degrees on your bare skin is not pleasant. You also want to make sure that you're washing your hands frequently. Your flux and the patinas and other things that we're going to be using throughout, they are chemicals. They're not going to hurt you like immediately, but long term they can do damage. I have gotten a chemical burn once before with one of the things that we'll be using later in the class, and I'll talk to you about it when that comes up. The other thing that I always have on hand is plain yellow mustard. Just a bottle from any grocery store, the cheapest yellow mustard you can find. Doesn't need to be refrigerated or anything like that. The reason I have it is because plain yellow mustard, when applied to a burn, takes care of that burn very quickly. Remember, I said that I've had solder roll into my lap. Well, those burns at 750 degrees should be third-degree burns easily. And they haven't been because they've gotten mustard on them immediately. And in fact, only once did they ever blister. Otherwise, they haven't even blistered. So what you do is once you burn yourself, you do not run your hand under cold water. You go get that mustard immediately. I literally keep it next to me when I'm soldering, and you put it directly on your burn and let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes, and then go wash with soap and cold water. And you should be pretty good to go. If not, if it's still looking really bad at that point, that's probably an emergency room visit, in my opinion. But if you can get the mustard on it quickly enough, I don't know what it is, guys, something about it, it takes care of it. You also want to make sure you're only using lead-free solder. Now, if you purchase the kit that's available through Robin and glassapplies41.com, you have gotten the exact spool of lead-free solder that is pictured here. You want to make sure, if you're going to go buy it somewhere else, you want to make sure it specifically says lead-free. You also do not want solder that says rosin core. The reason for that is that rosin core implies that the flux is built in. And while that may sound like a good idea, the problem is that that's not jewelry solder. So it's not going to shine up as nicely. And it's also going to react differently than what we wanted to do. That's much more for plumbing and electrical work. In terms of your iron, you want to keep your tip cleaned when you're finished. You want to just, and again, I'll show you this process in a little bit, but you will clean it before you unplug it. And you always want to make sure that you unplug your iron from the power source. Plugging it in is the only way to turn it off, and unplugging it is the only way to turn it on. But I've heard of people who have left theirs plugged into, say, a power strip, and they just turn off the power strip. Well, if there's a power surge and that power strip is not a highly protected power strip, you can have your iron switch on and sit and burn. And though it may not be touching anything other than your stand, hopefully, you can burn it out, and we don't want that. So make sure that you always unplug it from a power source. Don't just unplug it, or don't just turn it off at a switch. Make sure that you unplug it. All right, so what can you solder? Like I said before, we can solder anything that is copper, brass, nickel, silver, or steel. And we can solder anything that is wrapped in copper tape, like glass, pottery, stones. I will show you later in videos some of the different products that I work with that you can simply use tape on and solder and make whatever you want. You should not ever solder plastic, resin, paper, or anything else that's going to melt or burn. Now, I'd like to think that this is pretty self-explanatory, but you never know, especially the resin part. Though resin will withstand the heat, most resin products release toxic gas once they're heated up to a certain point. Now, again, this isn't something that's going to kill you while you're sitting there. It's something that's going to do damage over time. But I don't run the risk. I know other people who still solder resin, and that is totally up to them. I don't do it. I feel like I use my iron and my torches enough. I get enough exposure to all of these gases. I don't need to include something that isn't necessary. So I don't work with resin at all when it comes to my soldering iron. And I suggest that you don't either. Okay, so that is it for the pre-class information. I just wanted to go through safety stuff really quick so that we didn't have to worry about it as we get into the actual class. The next video, we'll start module 1. We'll go through supplies. I'll show you the various things that you're going to need if you haven't already gotten them. And I'll show you my basic setup so that you have an idea of what your setup should look like.